In today's class, I am going to teach you all a new chapter from Learning English. The name of the chapter is The Mystery of the Disappearing Face. This story is written by L.M. Fernandez. This is a detective story concerning crime and its investigation. Therefore, it is very interesting. There are three main characters in this story, namely the narrator who is narrating or telling the story in detail, his sister whose name was Monisha, and Ajay, a local boy. The plot of this story will render an intense feeling of fear, exhilaration, and excitement. The description of the creepy old bungalow and the entire surroundings will send shivers down your spine. So students, pay attention and listen to the story very carefully. One day, the narrator, his sister Monisha, and Ajay were walking past a dilapidated bungalow. Now, what does the word dilapidated mean? It means the bungalow was in a state of disrepair or ruin as a result of age or neglect. Suddenly, Monisha froze as she was staring at a closed window on the first floor of the building. When the narrator asked his sister what was up, she pointed and said that she had seen a face pressed against the window pane. It was withdrawn so suddenly she got the feeling that the boy had been pulled away by somebody. But the narrator pointed out that the window was closed. Even Ajay said that the window was shut. The owners of the property were away and nobody had been living in the house for 5 years, which was really a long span of time. But the little girl was quite sure that she had seen a face at the window. According to her, perhaps somebody had come to stay there or had broken in. Ajay wanted to take a look. Now, who was Ajay? Ajay was a local boy who was a year older than the narrator. Monisha and her brother, that is, the narrator, were outsiders who descended, which means they went to the village every summer to let themselves be shamelessly spoiled by their sweet grandmother. Ajay was already pushing open the rusty gate. Now, girls, what does rusty gate mean? It means that the gate was covered with rust. Now, what is rust? Rust is a reddish or yellowish brown flaking coating of iron oxide that is formed on iron or steel by oxidation, especially in the presence of moisture. Ajay gave the narrator no chance to warn them that entering inside without permission could get them into trouble. They went up to the front door and saw a great big lock on it, seeing which they went round to the back, fighting their way through a mass of overgrown shrubs and bushes. Now, this dense foliage was another indication or another clue that no one had been living there for years. But Monisha wanted to proceed further. As expected, there was a great big lock on the back door too. They checked each and every window. There must have been about 20 windows and all were tightly shut. So finally, Monisha was forced to submit that she must have imagined the face at the window. Grandma paid a lot of attention to them at the dinner table and asked whether they had read about the millionaire's daughter who had been kidnapped, as she dumped a dollop of rice on the narrator's plate. Now, what does the word dollop mean? It means lump. Monisha asked Grandma where she had read about the kidnapping. On hearing Monisha's question, the narrator knew what was going on in her mind. He reminded her about the boy whose face she had seen against the window pane and forbade means to prevent somebody from doing something. So here the narrator forbade his sister from jumping to conclusions. Grandmother remembered and said that it was a girl who was 10 years old. Now, Grandma subscribed to a daily newspaper and spent half the afternoon reading it. She went through it again at night. So, she had the habit of reading newspapers in detail. Both Monisha and the narrator were very tired that night. The narrator fell asleep the moment his head touched the pillow. But Monisha shook him awake perhaps an hour later. She said triumphantly that there was somebody in that old house. The lock on the front door was heavy and old. Monisha asked her brother about it and also about the lock on the back door, but he said that he could not remember and was quite annoyed. He told Monisha to come to the point and tell him clearly about what was going on in her mind. Monisha said that the lock on the back door was big and a brand new one. This meant that someone had broken the old lock and put a new one in its place. Now Monisha was sure that the kidnapped girl was being held up there. The narrator thought that she had seen a boy, knowing which Monisha said she might have been mistaken, or perhaps the kidnappers had dressed her like a boy to prevent people from recognizing her. She wanted to go and see her right then, as she did not want to leave her at the mercy of the kidnappers. The window of their bedroom was only a few feet above the ground. The narrator opened the grill and they jumped out. In order to get in, Monisha planned to stand on his brother's shoulder and pull herself up. Afterwards, she could let down a bed sheet or something for her brother to come up. Now Ajay's house was shrouded in darkness. The narrator whistled once, twice, but there was no response. Finally, both of them left, and the torch that the narrator was carrying created circles of yellow light in front of them. So what did they decide to do? They decided to go round to the back and let themselves in through the side gate. The gate of the dilapidated bungalow was wide open. Monisha was staring goggle-eyed at the gate. Now, what does goggle-eyed mean? It means her eyes were very wide open because she was astonished. A shiver of fear ran down the narrator's back, but he tried to control his fear. He told Monisha to follow him. Bravely, she led the way to the back door, and then all the courage drained from the narrator. There was no lock on the door, which meant that somebody was in the house. They tried to run and came face to face with a villainous-looking fellow. Villainous means somebody who is guilty of wicked or criminal behavior. That means a person who commits crimes. There was a handkerchief knotted around his neck, and he had a gun in his hand. The narrator asked him who he was, but he was so petrified, that means he was so terrified that he could not even speak. But Monisha was braver than her brother. She pleaded to let them go. Suddenly, a little figure came out from behind a tree and forcefully hit hard on the man's head. And who was that little figure? It was Ajay, who had heard the narrator whistle and guessed they were coming there, so he followed them. He told the narrator to cover the man with the gun. He would go and get the police. 10 minutes later, the man began to stir, but there was no sign of Ajay or the police. Monisha shrieked that the man was getting up. The narrator held the gun with both hands and ordered him not to move, but he seemed unconscious of the gun. He looked up at the house and whistled and then yelled. Yelled means to shout very loudly. And then what happened? Immediately, 3 men rushed out. Ajay and the local constable arrived just then. The constable's brother-in-laws followed on another cycle. The narrator's hands shook uncontrollably, but he kept the gun pointed at the man he had got it from. The man brushed past him, and the narrator fired in the air. He pulled the trigger, but nothing happened. Then he realized that it was not a real gun. The next day, they learned that they had helped bust a gang of robbers. Now, girls, what is the meaning of bust? It means catch. So they helped catch a gang of robbers that the police had been trying to catch for months. Ajay explained that the bungalow was their hideout, which means the bungalow was their hiding place. They operated in the towns and cities, but they hid out in that bungalow. On being asked who that boy was, Ajay said that there was no boy. What Monisha had seen was a gangster with a mask on. They used masks in their wicked work. Grandma came to know about their escapade and was very upset because they had sneaked, means they went out of the house at night. But the narrator gave her a big hug and she melted. So students, now your homework is that you will read the chapter thoroughly and try to write a summarized version of the story in your own words. Thank you.